Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Anson and Paul's Big Movie Podcast. I'm Anson Chan doing a bad impression of Daniel Day-Lewis.
And I'm a bastard from a basket.
And today we are reviewing There Will Be Blood.
By Paul Thomas Anderson.
Yes, written and directed by Paul Thomas Anderson.
Loosely based on the novel Oil by Upton Sinclair from the early 1900s.
And mostly based off of the life and times of Paul Morgan.
That's right.
Yep.
Before they even happened.
Yep. It's very prophetic in that way. So, Paul, what do we start with? I forget. It has been a long time since we've done a podcast. Do we start with the synopsis?
Right. Yeah, I'll do a little synopsis. We start in the what I believe to be the California deserts with Daniel Plainview, a slightly younger man with a glorious old beard. He has dug himself a little mine from which to look for gold. He then finds a little bit of gold, comes into some money, and starts a business drilling for oil. We see his operation go from super low rent to super high end, and the story mostly centers around his oil well that he brings in a city called Little Boston in California, and the relationship he has with the townspeople, specifically their preacher, Eli Sunday, played by Paul Dano, and all of the ways in which his ambition manifests itself both positively and negatively over the course of what I think is like the next probably 30-ish years of his life.
Yes,
including
because
his... go for it.
I believe the first shot is like very late 1800s or like 1901.
It's 1898.
There you go, yeah.
First shot is 1898, and they cut to 1902 right after that.
Yeah, because 18 years definitely go by when his son and him...
His fake son.
When he gets married. Well, his bastard and basket.
Yeah.
Let's not mix terms here. Woof, 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 woof.
Right.
Right. So yeah, I think about 30 years does pass. You're correct.
Yeah, more of a portrait of a man than anything, if we're being completely honest here. So I guess let's just really quickly get out of the way likes and dislikes so that we can have more of a general discussion, because I think this is one of the few podcasts that we're dedicating the whole thing to one movie.
Yeah, so I was talking to Paul a while ago. We're trying to think about some movies to watch, and I just wanted an excuse to rewatch There Will Be Blood. I want to be able to point to something and say, this is why I like There Will Be Blood. This is why it is, I think, my favorite movie. And
this is definitely my favorite movie besides Men in Black.
Oh, see, well, that's not a fair contest then, because...
No, I just mean like those two, like this is my favorite movie of all time. The only other movie in any genre that I can point to as having so little issue with it as I have with this movie is Men in Black.
Okay. I thought you were trolling, and I was going to roll
No,
with
not
your
at all.
punch.
I'm not even joking at all.
Oh, man. Well, Will Smith would be very proud to hear this.
Yeah.
No, I love this movie. I think it's a fucking flawless movie. The whole time, you're just completely hypnotized by the camera movement, the sound design, the way in which the story progresses, the little things that indicate the evolution / breaking down of the man. Daniel Day-Lewis's character, Plainview, whatever his name is. Daniel Plainview. Yeah. I forget that Daniel's name is Daniel, and Daniel's There Will Be Blood.
Yeah.
But
so before I guess we do likes and dislikes, just some notable things about this movie real quick. Ciarán Hinds is Daniel Day-Lewis's right-hand man. Paul Dano plays the brothers Paul and Eli Sunday. Kevin J. O'Connor puts in a great performance as someone who, we never really know the truth about this, but someone who claims to be Daniel Plainview's brother. The music was done by Johnny Greenwood of Radiohead.
Damn.
The cinematography was done by Robert Elswit, who has done a few things that are pretty famous, like The River Wild, Heart 8, Boogie Nights, Magnolia. So other Paul
Oh.
Thomas Anderson movies, Syriana, Michael Clayton, Duplicity, stuff like that. I think he also did the most recent Mission Impossible movie.
Mm,
And Nightcrawler, funny enough.
man.
And then,
So many like of my favorite movies to watch.
yeah, right. And
Mhm.
then one thing we don't mention a lot in this, mostly because I do not come from a background of it, and I'm not sure you do either, is the editor. I thought the editing in this movie is really fantastic. Dylan
Mm.
Tickner, who did some of my favorite movies, like this, Magnolia, Unbreakable, The Royal Tenenbaums, Brokeback Mountain, Assassination of Jesse James, and some other stuff. So yeah, pretty good technical crew rounding out this movie.
Totally. Yeah, it's like a powerhouse team.
And also notable is this is one of Paul Thomas Anderson's few movies that took in more than its budget.
Oh, really?
His movies have a bad habit of not doing super well in the box office.
Yeah.
This one made back 3 times its budget in box office.
I was gonna say
So
I thought that this was like a pretty low budget movie just for how minimalist its use of like set and yeah, just things that need to happen in this movie.
yeah.
The story alone holds it up. So I was like, this probably can't cost too much to make.
Yeah, I think between the writing and the really powerful acting, you don't really need a lot of flash
Yeah.
in
It's
this.
totally held up on its own, like on their own strengths.
Yeah.
Where, like I said, the writing is super solid, the camera work is super solid, the sound design is super solid. They don't need like any special effects really. You don't need to build huge, magnificent set pieces or anything, minus the derrick, which is like a super cool thing to see
Yeah, and
throughout.
even then, it's made of mostly, relatively thick pieces of wood, which I mean, I can't imagine that costs
No.
a shitload to do, except for the fact that they had to burn it down a few times for, various reasons.
We can get a quote from Home Depot, see if they can do the
Right.
math for us and
Yeah.
source it out like with inflation, 100 years,
Yeah.
like 115 years. But no, it probably can't cost that much. All this stuff is just super tight. It's just a very tight movie with not a lot of flash. Oh yeah, a lot of this is just shot outside too, so it's not like you need like a huge set or a crew or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of the shots are done with hand cam. While you see the camera kind of like moving in and out of buildings or like below like doorways and awnings and kind of like following characters over the shoulder and stuff. A lot of it is shot outside or like in a building that is basically outside, for lack of a better word, like the
Yeah, you see a lot of
mess hall.
buildings that they work in, like the mess hall, for example, that are pretty much. I mean, obviously, you'll supplement this when you're making a movie, but pretty much lit by natural light.
Yeah,
So whenever the camera's looking into those types of structures, you see a lot of silhouettes. And then when they're actually shooting inside of the structure, they expose for the inside of the structure, and it looks relatively good by virtue of the fact that most of the light is coming from above, and then it diffuses as it comes through the windows there. So
yeah. I mean, this movie is just so beautiful for the way that it plays with light. Or like the old noir movies that I like so much, how you can play with shadows in coming in and out of frame with what they do. This movie does that in spades, where the direction in which a character is looking in regards to like the sun, how it's kind of like shining on their scene, or how they're shaded by like, I don't know, trees or clouds, whatever. It becomes so symbolic and important to the scene that it's just so genius. Not a lot of movies do this at all. And it seems like it's so doable, but it's just like so fucking hard to do that because these shots have to be like done in like one take or a couple takes to keep the lighting, to keep the scene crisp. It's such a well done movie that, man, I think anyone can appreciate. I know some people don't like this, would consider it an art house movie, but I could ooze on for days. Is there anything else you want to say before we start going into specifics?
One quick thing, not related to anything we've mentioned so far, but one of my favorite things about this movie, and I have tried and tried and tried to find this quote since we watched it, but I have not been able to. I remember when this movie came out, Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead, the guy who composed the music, his quote about the score for this movie was, "I tried to make an orchestra sound like a drum machine and failed." I just think that is like first of all, that's the most Radiohead quote of all time. But second of all, I just think that's hilarious because, it goes to show that even a personal failure for someone can turn out to be the perfect thing for a project.
Yeah, I think that can create a lot of inspired editing or working around. Because the way that the music is intertwined with the story, the pacing of the scene, the mood, or whatever is being conveyed to the audience is so powerful. And the only really memorable song in this movie is the one that you like, the one that I like, that you know. And that's only played like, I'd say 2 or 3 times. Once at the very end.
It's very brief, that's for sure.
Yeah, once at the very end, once when they cut the well in Little Boston for the first time. Yeah, I think it's only twice that I can count. But yet the music will just carry you so far in this movie. And that is really funny that he says, if he considers this a personal failure, which, I'd say, buck up Radioheadman. You did a fine job.
Yeah, really fucking awesome shit.
So, Paul, let's get down to business to defeat the Huns. What did you like about There Will Be Blood specifically? What really stood out for you and worked?
Most of it has to do with the writing, and I want you to feel comfortable stopping me if you think I am droning on. So first bit with regard to the writing, I think this is one of the most perfect examples of a story that showcases what I perceive to be realistic oppositional opportunism. Which I mean, on one hand, you have Daniel Plainview, who is an opportunist with a massive set of acquired skills. You hear him mentioning to his fake brother at one point, "Oh, I work for the U.S. Geological Survey. I was like doing mapping for people." And then you see in the beginning, he found his own gold and he learned the oil trade from the ground up and became this powerhouse. And on the other hand, you have Paul Dano's Eli Sunday character, who is an opportunist who's a charlatan.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he is completely the example that every, like, obnoxious modern atheist would give as, like, a bullshitter religious asshole type. He constantly sees in other people opportunities to make money, and he uses his church as the excuse when really he's using this to enrich himself. I think the biggest example of this is in the very beginning of the movie when Daniel Plainview is first negotiating for the Sunday Ranch. He talks with Abel Sunday, and Abel Sunday lays down a series of terms, and then he butts in at the price per acre or whatever, and then Abel Sunday says, yes, whatever Eli says. And then Eli says, I want $10,000. And Daniel Plainview's like, what? Where did this come from? What do you want it for? And he kind of like looks at him kind of challengingly. And he says, for my church. And he's like, okay, this guy's a fucking idiot. So they're oppositionally opportunists. One wants one thing and he's really freaking good at it, and he really works hard at it. The other one wants another thing, and he's a faker. He's a charlatan. Everyone in the town buys his bullshit, and yet he's allowed to persist by the one person that knows he's a faker, which is Daniel Plainview. So there's that. That is something you don't see done subtly. But then the second thing with regard to the script is Daniel and Eli are slighting each other on a constant basis. one of them slights the other, then the other slights the other, then the other slights the other.
Mm-hmm.
It starts with that meeting where Eli clearly knows that Paul got in there before him. And he waits he waits way too late into the conversation to say, well, what about our oil? And then after that, it's this slight after slight after slight. So from then it becomes he tries to butt in on Daniel's derrick opening by saying, oh, let me bless the derrick. And then Daniel doesn't like that, so when he comes up, he blesses the derrick, and he uses the phrase Eli wanted him to use about Eli's little sister. And then it's Daniel, flexing his nut over Abel by saying, hey, you got to stop beating your daughter. Not because he actually cares about the daughter, but, he just thinks beating is wrong, and he's exercising power over this person who he essentially now owns.
No more hitting.
Yeah. They keep flexing these little power moves at each other until the first time when it gets violent, which is when Eli comes and says, where's our money, Daniel? And Daniel Plainview fucking buries him in the mud and slaps him with the oil and the dirt and the mud and stuff.
When do we get our money, Daniel?
Aren't you a healer? And a vessel for the Holy Spirit? When are you coming over and make my son hear again? Can't you do that?
Let me bless the world. It's happening. Daniel, you shouldn't have done that. You owe the Church of the Third Revelation $5,000.
So that escalation is subtle and beautiful, but through all of those things I've already mentioned, the thing that I think is most special about this writing is the mental deterioration of a man who doesn't do any emotional work for himself. Eli is allowed to keep going and be his same pathetic self throughout the entire movie, even up until the point at the end when he comes to Daniel pathetically, begging for money, because he's deluded. He thinks that this God thing, this preaching thing is going to work out for him. Daniel is not allowed to stay at the same mental level for the entire movie, whereas we see him rising a little bit at the beginning of the movie in his fortitude and trying to, really blaze his own path. And then once he has a modicum of success, which to be fair to his competitors, is not even close to the success that like Standard Oil has, for example, he becomes vindictive. And then his vindictiveness causes him to act out. And then when bad things happen to him, he realizes, oh, I have the power to just send this problem away. So he sends his son away. And then he has this guy encroaching upon his territory who's obviously a freeloader after a certain point. Well, no one's going to really call me on it. There's no security cameras because we live in 1911 at this point. I can just go out into the wilderness and kill him. He realizes that he can act with impunity after a certain point, and that, coupled with his alcoholism, makes him mentally deteriorate after the point where he starts conflicting with Eli.
I want to talk about that a little bit later, but I was going to bring up a point in mind because I think that's the simple power corrupteth the man that one might see in this. But in how it plays out with Daniel, because I was giving it a lot of thought on this walkthrough of the evolution of Daniel's character, or at least his what we would consider his deterioration of his humanity.
Yeah.
And he is still a very gentle person up until his brother comes. Up until you see the accident with his son.
Yeah,
and
I would say the accident with his son is the first breaking point because he loses patience with him almost immediately.
Well, it's hard because when you watch Daniel, when you come back to this movie, you learn so much about, when you watch it for the first time, you want to see the story. You're not sure if the God angle is going to have like some righteous judgment hammer coming down on the character of Daniel Plainview or Eli. You don't know. And so you're more swept by the idea of the moral, perhaps, or the deterioration of, you want to see, does greed corrupt? And that's such a simple reading in this movie.
Yeah.
But when you watch the character Daniel Plainview and his interactions with his son at all times in the beginning are very genuine and empathetic. When he says way later in the end of the movie, which is really just to hurt him, and then to show his, like, the opportunist side, as you said. Because I think it's like, when someone says, oh, I can help this grandma across the street, and who knows, maybe she'll give me a cookie, and I also did a good thing, right? It's a little bit of both. You can have both. Or it's like, well, if I choose to go into the city today to go hang out, at least I'll be in the city, and then I can also do the thing that I want. Even if I can't, then I'll still, I can go walk over to karaoke or something.
Yeah.
It's the end this kind of idea. So I don't think that his motivation for being like a genuinely good-hearted human being in the beginning is really ever truly motivated purely by greed. And he needs his little friend, his little son, to be his little buddy. Because he's talking about the business. He's teaching him, like, we're not going to give him oil prices. We're going to give him quail prices.
Quail prices. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
As though he knows. He's his little outlet. Not only for the audience, but it shows like a very good relationship that they have with a lot of trust. They're joking around. They're joshing around. They're playing around. At the very end, after he kind of has his breaking point with his son, and you see that cut of like when they were out in front of the derrick before the accident, and everyone's happy and they're playing around,
Yeah.
I remember the video saying like, "Oh, Daniel Plainview is only doing this for appearances." I was like, I don't think so, because that moment shows genuine love and happiness in the moment, and in
I think he
the
grew
raising
to
of the
love
boy.
and appreciate the kid. And I think one of the best scenes to illustrate that is after the kid's dad died, when Daniel and the very, very young kid are sitting
baby.
on the train, and the kid starts reaching towards his mustache and kind of like stroking it. And then you can kind of see this care in his eyes.
Yeah.
After which time it seems like he's really endeared to him. And obviously he's still like does the authoritative parental stuff to him, like hurry up, HW, or like, fast as you can, HW, stuff like that. But none of that is in malice. It's just kind of like the way you parented a kid back then.
Just being a dad.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I see that. The deterioration of him and his increasing willingness to do things that I think you could argue are immoral with impunity over the course of the movie really, I think, is one of the best structured breakdowns or deteriorations of a character's moral fiber over the course of a movie length that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I'll try not to rant too much longer, but my obvious usual things are music and sound design and cinematography. I think all were extremely well done. I love the click clacking of the drumsticks on the rims of the snare drums. I love the dun 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 dun. The very
the
like
sound
driving.
Of the train.
Yeah, I also love the kind of the violin shifts where you have two sets of violins, one coming from high and one coming from low, and they kind of slowly roll into the same note in the middle. That's a very horror movie sounding kind of effect. And they use it to great horror effect. Like, for example, when they show Daniel crawling across the desert with his broken leg, and it of like, it starts on him in kind of a medium close, and then it pans up to this ultra wide of just this vast expanse of desert, and that sound plays, and it's this kind of horror moment of like, oh fuck, like he's gonna be crawling for fucking ever. Like, that is just really well done. I don't agree with this in real life, but I do like the theme of greed can ruin your life. I'm not saying Daniel Plainview had a ruined life.
Disagree with that being the primary message in the movie.
I didn't say that was. I said it was a theme in the movie. What are you thinking? Because I want to say my bit about this, but I also want to hear what you have to say about it.
I don't ever think that greed is his ruin or downfall. It's not like Wolf of Wall Street, or not or just regular Wall Street, where like greed is good. It's more of his continued success changes the scope in how he sees people, his business, his relationship with the world, rather. But it is like never really overly greedy or like by any means necessary until perhaps the very end. There's always that chip on his shoulder that's like, well, I'll show you. I'm going to do the best I can. I find all you people like these people, he says, like, you know, kind of below him in that very revealing conversation he has with his brother. But it's not ever done like, if he was super duper duper greedy, he could have fucked over people at way more turns, you know? He could have been way more violent, way more savage, but he's not. And he never was.
Okay, let me reframe what I'm saying then, because you're right. His increasing willingness to remove the obstacles around him in increasingly immoral ways leads to him being a broken person at the end.
I wanted to talk about that later, but yes, I will agree
on
that point.
I think that as a credo for a moral life or a reason for a moral life is one of the most effective lessons I've ever learned. Or I didn't learn it from this movie, but one of the most effective lessons I've ever seen put to film.
Your willingness to use power to remove
No.
obstacles?
His willingness to use increasingly immoral methods of removing his own personal obstacles. Can I explain that?
Yeah, and I'd like to rebut that too when you have a chance.
So we know from watching the movie, we know from seeing the middle and the end of the movie that he doesn't like people. He wasn't ever going to get married. He wasn't going to ever do anything outside of go to the whorehouse that he went to at one point in the movie every so often.
Or at least just because his brother, alleged brother, wanted to go.
Yeah.
You just see him sitting there miserable.
But point being, he wasn't ever going to get married or have a wife or a girlfriend or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
In the beginning, you see him overcoming this obstacle by doing something that any decent person would do. Taking a kid whose dad just died and raising it as your own. Later on, after having trouble after trouble after trouble after trouble after trouble with Eli, he finally, after the derrick has produced oil, resorts to violence with Eli, slapping him around and shit.
Well, this is a little bit different because the circumstance changed. He's in a really, really bad spot. His kid just
But
got
here, let me
totaled.
finish this whole thing. You got to let me finish this whole thing because this is really
Absolutely.
important and it does all fit together.
Okay.
So he finally becomes violent after his kid loses his hearing. And he becomes violent with Eli, who's essentially a vessel for his frustration about his kid's circumstance. Then, realizing that he could essentially just rid himself of his kid altogether, he rids himself of his kid altogether. I think you could probably make an argument that that is not immoral, but I would say from the point of view of someone who has taken this kid on and has taken on the role of a parent, probably not the most loving thing to do.
Well, I will disagree with you.
From there, well, I think you could argue that he had the means to bring those learned people to him and continue to raise his kid and learn alongside him while the kid is getting better. Anyways, continuing on, when his brother comes in, his fake brother, he finally, one, admits to Eli and the town that he abandoned his son, which is what he did. He abandoned him. Whereas, like I said, he could have easily brought those learned people to him and learned ASL alongside his son, which he didn't. And then finally, he kills someone because that person lied a little bit to him.
Lied a little bit.
He could have just as easily let that person go or told him, get the fuck out of here. You're not welcome. He could have even, within the scope of my moral compass, he could have even threatened bodily harm to him and left it at that. But no, he killed him.
Yep.
From there, another killing takes place later on in his life, but he increasingly uses more and more immoral means to deal with his problems. And at the end of the movie, he wakes up like still drunk. He drinks first thing as soon as he wakes up. He's rich as fuck with nothing to do with his money besides drink and hang out. And he's just kind of bitter and old and broken. That's my thesis about that particular part of the writing of the movie. Anyways, you were about to argue something I said.
Well, I want to agree with you in the moment. We see the evolution of Daniel Plainview's savagery, if you will. But he only ever vents his savageness or frustration or acts upon that when extraordinary circumstances kind of like happen to him or around him. His son, when he sends him away, just try to burn his house down with him inside sleeping. That's pretty bad. And when you
but any psychologist will tell you that in response to trauma and in response to no one doing anything to help that trauma, people will act out. This is a commonality in societies all over the world.
Oh no, I completely understand that as why the kid did that. But to write it off simply as like Daniel could have brought the learned men into the camp and taught him, that is true. But after you just try to set your house on fire, it's like, oh, we gotta kind of... Our relationship needs a breather kind of thing, you know what I mean? Because like that's pretty bad. You might send a kid to boarding school for that. That's fairly reasonable in my opinion. When he shoots his alleged brother, who we then learn is not at all, he's just an imposter who's wearing the name and the skin and the story of his actual brother who died. This all happens very quickly. His first instance of frustration is with his son. It's still very childish, right? He chases him out and he grabs him. He still doesn't hit him. He still doesn't beat him. He just grabs him and takes him back to the house and then sends him away. When Eli comes, when he beats on him, it's done in such a childish manner. He just slaps him in the face and drags him by the hair into the oily mud, you know, and just kind of like makes him roll around in the mud and kind of slaps mud around him. It's not brutal. It's not like a wailing on Gangs of New York style. It's still very adolescent, if you will, in his handling of his problems, or I guess it's just like inner turmoil.
Don't even try it. Right. Splash around in here. That's it.
When you do get to his brother, just like I said, revealing that he is not his brother, and he completely took advantage of not only his trust or his like what he above all else is like family. I can see good in you for once. I can see good in someone. Like all I want is to have there to be a good person by my side. And then to have that completely betrayed and rejected and to be made a fool of, you know.
But I don't think he sees the good in his brother.
There is no good in his brother. He wasn't his brother.
You just said he has a chance to see the good in people.
Because he had the key, which was I'm part of your family. You can kind of trust me.
You can see in almost every scene where they're together. I mean, maybe this is my read of the scenes, but Daniel Plainview resents him just for being another person he has to put up with on a regular basis. The reason he doesn't mind Ciarán Hinds' character is because that guy just does the business and then fucks off.
No, Daniel doesn't resent him until later when he becomes like, when he has a suspicion about him. Because his right-hand man's like, you're really taking your brother? Because he's kind of like a no account. But he's taking him along because he feels like he can trust him and he's still willing to put up with his shortcomings because he feels like, he's someone who I can see the good in man through. Someone of my own heart kind of person. But when that is revealed to be a lie, that's like someone would take advantage of that he was so willing to trust and like put his heart and like, everything into. I'm willing to take you on all my business trips. I'm willing to, we're going to work together and be like our kind of like HW team too. You're going to help me survey all this other stuff. I'm going to, I want to reminisce with you and go back to my simpler time. Say we'll get liquored up and take them to the peach tree dance. To have that taken away from you, or to understand that that was just illusory, that sense of betrayal cannot be like, you can leave now. You're free to go. And you can't also, this is the hard part, because he's a man of great pride, Daniel, admit that he opened up and took this chance and let this guy completely not rule his life or run his life, but infect his life and insert himself in a way that no one else should have any right to. And that's the most hurtful part, because he thought he had the shared history and the, of the same town, talking about like, what was the name of the farm on the top of the hill? Just regular shit that he can't have. So in his dealing with his brother and killing him, that's a pretty... You besmirched his honor. And not only that, but you further isolated him and hurt him psychologically and emotionally, where he will never ever recover from. Because...
I understand that.
He doesn't have an outlet
dealing
anymore.
With that problem is... Okay. I understand that... I understand what you just said. It makes total sense to me. Especially the bit about, completely ruining his trust in people forever.
Yeah.
But here's what I have to say about the killing bit. Within the context of 1911, 1915 society, I totally understand how you would kill someone over that. Because around that time in history, people on a daily basis got killed for a lot less.
Oh, and they did duels back then, too. Dueling was still a thing.
But what I'm saying is, based on my modern morality, I guess, I would never consider that to be an appropriate response to even something that severe. And I would love to see a movie that deals with a modern version of that, because I just don't think that's an appropriate response.
Consider it my inner honor, but I empathize, understand, and validate his action of like, yeah, just kill him. This fucker. And he doesn't do it in a brutal way, but man, you see the anger in his eyes. Daniel Day-Lewis just acts so brilliantly just through the use of his eyes. They become fiery balls, black and cold at the same time as he is understanding.
There are many scenes in this movie where that happens, yeah.
This is definitely the biggest one, though, where his whole... It's easy to say, it's a throwaway line. He snaps, but this is a very deep snap. It snaps him forever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then he never... Yeah. Oh, man. Watching that as the catalyzing moment in his life is just so wonderful. And when he realizes, like, when his suspicion is too great for him to ignore anymore, when he's at the beach after they've just surveyed the pipeline route to the ocean, as soon as he realizes that there's something fucked up with his brother, and he goes into the water to distance himself, and you see the ocean like carry him as he's like looking at him with bewildered and just struggling eyes, just very conflicting. You can see the emotion of the sound, but the water, the ocean, the big waves kind of like lulling him along tell you that it's already set.
Yeah.
This is already happening. This is out of everyone's control at this point, because this is just where Daniel Plainview is right now. Yep. So I understand his honor killing, and I say, yeah, that's good for you, Daniel. Although I'm really sorry that you never truly come back from this. It's too bad.
Fair enough.
Anyway, that was my point to your...
What worked for you in this? What were your favorite bits? We're about at the 45-minute mark right now. So I'm thinking I talked for most of the last 30 or so minutes, so feel free to go as much as you feel you need to.
I'll probably go as long as you. Technically speaking, this is a movie that you watch every single shot is done with a purpose. The slow pan of the camera with this really wide shot, kind of moving, keeping with the atmosphere, and like really making you focus on what's happening around the characters, as well as what might be going on internally in, at least in so far as it relates to Daniel, what he's thinking. And how he's thinking about dealing with Eli, doing a deal, dealing with the Derek. Great. The camera is such a powerful storytelling medium in this movie that it's just so easy to appreciate. The thing that the Nerdist brought up was the lack of cuts in this movie. I love that too.
Very slow cuts.
Yeah, or if they do it, like you notice like a very deliberate cut because it's just used so infrequently. It's like watching a play. And I love that. And there are so many shots that are like done in one take. His speech with Eli, I think, only has like at the very end, might have like one cut when he like throws him down the bowling lane. So many of those shots are just done like on one take, and you just get to sit there with a very wide screen and basically watch the play unfold before you. And it just feels glorious when you watch that.
Yeah.
God, is it nice is to appreciate. You can just sit there and be mesmerized. So the camera work, again, like I said, is just a beautiful storytelling medium in this. The use of sound is amazing because a lot of times it's very quiet out on the California desert, so you really hear the sting of the music to get you into a mood or to amplify it. The sound of the boots on the dirt or the iron on the drill, just the sound of the moving wheels and all this kind of stuff is just also just done with such minimalism. It's never overdone, but it just helps the immersion so much. And it just is also another thing that you can really perk up to while watching this movie. Say, oh, this sounds so good. I really enjoyed watching the evolution of Daniel's knowledge of his craft. As like a young man, his mind is very rickety, for lack of a better word. And the ever-present theme of like danger just around the corner is built up so well in the beginning. At first it's physical danger, what with his lack of engineering knowledge or like kind of, lack of a better phrase, ghetto rigs and setups that he has, because he's just getting the job done.
Yeah.
One of my favorite shots is in the very beginning of the movie where he's mining for gold and he's trying to bring the bucket up after just having inserted dynamite into his mine. And he has to climb up that whole fucking mine and say, oh my God, how long is this fuse? Even the dynamite looks kind of shabby.
Yeah.
When he's trying to like go up, he's up there and he's like taking the bucket and he's trying to bring it up, but he's too weak to even like bring the bucket up. Or maybe he doesn't know, like, he has the, I think the right way to do it, because he has like an iron spike down into the ground with like a ring in it. He could use that as leverage to pull it too, because that actually does decrease the weight substantially for how much you're pulling. But he doesn't know that. He's just pulling directly backwards, right?
Yeah.
And he's stumbling. He's too weak to even get his supplies out of the mine. And they cut back to the bucket as the smoke from the dynamite fuse is kind of wafting and filling the mine as the bucket is just struggling, going up and down as he's like dropping the rope, And that sense of danger is just so ever present in the rest of the movie. And like I said, at first the danger is physical because he doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. Later it becomes more situational with the people around him and how he has to deal with his problems. He himself might not be in any more danger, like falling down the fucking mine and having to crawl all the way back to town, or being down in the well and, seeing his friend getting his head bashed in and he's covered in blood. What a powerful scene when he's sitting there across from the baby, half covered in the blood of the father of the baby,
Yeah.
in oil, just looking into the eyes of the crying child. It's just brutal, because like, what do I do? And that could have been me. There's so many moments where Daniel has to reflect on his mortality because of what's happened. And it's
I mean,
changing
just
him constantly.
scenes before that, you see him cowering with his. I mean, not that
Well, he
I
had
wouldn't be
to.
doing this either. Just covering his head, just kind of being like,
That's the
like-
smart thing to do.
no, exactly. Like I said, I wouldn't do
Yeah.
anything different, but just
Yeah.
fucking A, man.
Yeah, like this is what I was saying earlier, where his scope changes. He doesn't have to get his hands dirty anymore. God knows he doesn't want to take the physical risk anymore. He doesn't have to either. And when people died around him before, it had a huge toll on him. He was affected visibly, even though no lines of dialogue are ever said or spoken. In the way he acts and looks and interacts with, the child and others around death is very human. There's worth in human life still. And perhaps because it could have been him or other reasons,
Yeah.
He's not a monster. And then later, as his success grows and he doesn't so-and-so died in the well tonight. And he's like, did I know him? And he's like, nope. And he's thinking about it. He's thinking about this guy who died. Should he care? As much even? Because he didn't know him. It wasn't like his other buddy who died and he took his son in, It's interesting to see how the way he perceives the world as the world changes around him.
Yeah.
His interacting with it and the way he just feels about people and the circumstances. Where before when his good buddy and they were having the Derrick fire and he's like, what are you looking so sad about? We have a whole ocean below that. Because normally, he's burning off thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars for as long as that fire is going, That's a fortune by any given standard. All that oil burning off. But he's like, whatever. Fuck it. I'm rich. We have more. And then his friend asks him, like, hey, is HW okay? He's like, no, he's not. He's like, uh-oh.
And then for the rest of that night, after that question is asked, literally for the rest of the night, he's staring at the derrick.
He sits out there and watches the fire.
The next scene
covered in oil.
The next scene is from behind him
Mm-hmm.
the next morning, and it appears as if he has not moved.
Nope. Just covered in the same oil of the night before. Watching his well go up, or rather smolder to the ground. Oh, man. A fucking amazing shot. It's a scene that sticks with you. I love that. Covered in the blood of his buddies, in the oil, just coated in the oil in so many different scenes,
Yeah.
Beautiful. Where Daniel is like, he still, he wants to be that family guy. When that Tilford? Yeah, the railroad guy, the oil guy.
Oh, yeah.
Is like, did you tell me how to raise my family? He still takes offense to that because he still values HW. He still values the family, or at least the idea of it, right? Whereas he takes so much personal offense to being slighted in that way. And the evolution of Daniel from this point on, after he has to, he kills his brother after just saying so strongly how much he feels about family.
Yeah.
And yet you never see him ever interact with his other family, his sister, or perhaps if his mother was alive, you know what I mean? When he reads about the death of his brother and the death of, or whatever, his dad dying and all this other stuff, he's so moved. He's moved to tears. The only time you ever see Daniel cry is when he's like, I don't know anymore. I don't know what's real anymore.
Yeah.
It's so powerful. This is an interesting, I don't know if this is the right insight, but after this scene, when he follows Bandy back to the church to get baptized, and you see the charlatan Eli really trying to hammer home and get at Daniel, or to really just kind of get his own little bit of revenge on Daniel and humiliate him and beat him down emotionally with what,
it's the
'cause now
latest
that he's in his
series in
house.
the series of slights I described earlier.
Right. This is a big one though, and I love the use of the natural light, what we talked about earlier, where it just lights the scenes, the faces, the shadows. In this case, there's a glass cross behind him that's letting in light, which should be natural light, but it looks so alien. It's as though he's distorting true light in this church. This thing that's like the the epitome of man and his like moral values, the righteousness of, you know, all this other stuff that we see in God and in each other kind of thing. And it's just so distorted, this light that's coming through the window, where he's really just taking advantage of Daniel's emotional state at that time. Like, you were weak, you lusted for women, he says in his sermon. And you know that's total bullshit given what the story has conveyed to us, you know?
Yeah.
He's just saying shit because he's going wild and out. And then he says, you abandon your child. He's like, I abandoned my boy. Making him have to come to terms with that, or to say that, I wonder if that helped him, Daniel that is, accept that reality of not just like, I can be an opportunist. If I help out HW, it also kind of helps me out kind of thing. Which is never, I think, was ever his motivation. But it could have been, but it was like really remote. By pushing that on him having to come to terms, or not even come to terms, with stepping into that perception or in that mental headspace of, I did abandon my boy, where family was the one thing sacred to him, aside from his own drive for success. For him to admit, or to have to, like, come into that, I've abandoned my boy, I've abandoned family, I've abandoned my last true thing that connects me to other people as a human being, maybe did set into motion the deterioration of the man, the very human man, before we, you know, Daniel the monster exists, right? Daniel the business monster.
Yeah.
That was maybe the last thing that killed him, was, fuck it. What is family to me anyway? I abandoned my boy. Who is my family? I have no brother. You know? Fucking brutal. And yet he still... And I love the scene right after, when he confronts Tilford in the bar, you know, and he's getting slided at the bar. I love when he puts the napkin over his face, so HW can't read his mouth or see that he's talking, right? And it is only for everyone else in the bar, but not for his actual son. That he's... Because it wouldn't even matter if his son could understand that he was going to bat for him, right? Because it's just... They're in their own world at that point, and it's so sad. They're both so isolated from one another. And yet he still defends his honor as a family man against Tilfordson, who he thought just completely insulted him. But he just went through the worst fucking insult of his fucking life, right? Yeah. Where Eli just had the biggest fucking, like, one-up on him ever. And then he uses, like, the next scene, he takes it out on Tilford. Because, like, fuck you. But really, it's a lot of, I think, energy and anger that would have been directed towards Eli in any other given situation.
I was going to say, I think in that point in the movie, it would have been directed anywhere that provided him with any sort of conflict.
Yes. Yeah. You see that childish frustration. Because if you think about it,
you add to all the stuff that's just happened to him, the fact that now his son is back for a little bit, and he doesn't have any of the tools to put up with or help his son at all. Mm-hmm. So already that is adding tension to an already tense sort of, you know, time in his character's life. Yeah. And then he gets a little bit of confrontation and he just lashes right out at it.
Oh, sure.
Because what else would you do at that point? Yeah, he needed some sort of release of that energy that's been kind of building up. And if you count when he's yelling in the church, it's like, that's a release of the energy, but it's not
It's completely misdirected. Because Eli is just slapping him. And it's funny because the sound effects are like purposely like, they sound like very wimpy slaps. You know, whenever they're slapping each other, so it sounds very wimpy. But it's not a true release because it is him having to shout and perhaps internalize that family is not sacred to him anymore. In the church of this fucked up perversion of the idea of God, he has to basically renounce the one thing he holds sacred, which is his family, which is so fucking beautiful. Yeah. Painful, but beautiful. And this scene is comical where, because he's like, give me the blood, Lord. Come on, give me the blood. Oh, and he's like, there's a lot of humor in this because you see Daniel is just taking this totally not seriously. As like everyone's like, yes, praise the Lord, praise him. Yeah. As Eli is wimpily slapping him, as Daniel is just laughing with his like completely absurdist grin, knowing like this is just so stupid. As he's just taking it on his knees, getting slapped in the face, like you know, there's so much humor in that he sees the situation for just how fucking ridiculous it is too. And the words he whispers to Eli at the end of his ceremony, I love, because you don't know what he says, but you just see Eli's whole demeanor change, or he crumples. He's slouched over as everyone is saying, "Oh, praise you, Daniel. Oh, welcome to the church," and all that, right? And you just see in the corner as the camera's panning, following Daniel back and back. He's shrinking from the frame and becoming more and more blurred in the corner, you know? Like, oh, man, just watching the total defeat of what should be the triumph of Eli, right? And yet Eli still tries, like, one-up him, like, everyone stop, he has to come to God on his own, you know? Like, oh, man. This shit is just funny. Just watching the dynamics of power, the crumpling and defeat of people, is just such a joy to watch.
Yeah.
True triumph in this movie is very rare, unless it's like, do 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 do, which only happens 2 times. When he cuts to Derek, which is a huge triumph, and then when he kills Eli at the very end, which is like a huge triumph, you know? Oh, man. Anyway, let me move on quickly.
Real quick before you move on, one thing you mentioned that made me think of something is you mentioned that scene was funny when Eli
hilarious.
Was slapping him.
Yeah.
I think one thing I didn't mention that I love about this movie is that after the first viewing, each subsequent viewing, this movie is funnier and funnier and funnier and funnier. And Paul Thomas Anderson is really fucking good at making awful, awful shit funny. Like, if you've ever seen Punch Drunk Love, one of my favorite bits about
I love that movie
is how awful every person is in that movie, and yet they're so fun to laugh at.
Yeah.
Like, he knows that, like, the awfulness of humanity and the vindictiveness and all these bad habits we all have are funny. And he knows how to frame them in ways that are fun to watch. Anyways, go on.
Oh, that reminded me of something else I want to say. Oh, yeah. Daniel Day-Lewis, you're talking about, like, in my modern morality sense, I don't abide by. Not to say anything about that particularly, but framing Daniel's problems, he has what is lovingly known as rich people problems.
Yeah.
When I talk about his scope and his relationship with the world and what the world is to him, around him, changing.
Yeah. This
is like summed up neatly. He's got rich people problems, but just done in a very interesting, his own personal rich people problems. Fucking love. I wrote down in my notes what they represent, Eli and Daniel. I think we kind of talked about that at length. Eli the charlatan, when he's banishing arthritis. It's just
my god, dude.
That's so funny.
And the fact that still fucking happens in this world.
Yeah, I know. It's unbelievable.
Disgusts me.
And then when it cuts to Daniel, it's like grinning, smirking at the very idea of banishing arthritis.
He's just standing there at the back of the room with this beautiful, like, blown out
mustache.
Natural light behind him.
Oh,
and he's just got this smirk on his face, like the shit-eating, oh, well, this is fucking stupid.
Yeah, right. And I love the next shot, too, when he's, like, walking up to Eli. Not from in the church going outside. He's already outside walking into the frame from the foreground, being framed by the doorway. I just love that choice. What a good choice. He was like the first one out the fucking door, basically. That tells a lot in the story, but it's also just a really cool thing to see as you see the difference of how everyone else exits the church and how he's coming into it.
And also, that scene is a really good example of one of the few times in the story when Daniel actually tries to be reasonable with Eli and Eli doesn't take it. Because if you recall that conversation, it's the second time that he's trying to make Eli be realistic.
Yeah.
And he says, listen, if my guys are spending half the day in
Church.
Church with you, they're not doing the work. And if they're not doing the work, your town's not going to see any of the profit I've promised it. So you need to fucking let them. And Eli says, if I would have had more time with him, no, you need to leave my guys the fuck alone.
Yeah.
I love that, because the other time he tries to be reasonable with him is in the first scene with him and Abel, and he's like, what do you intend to do with that $10,000, huh?
Yeah.
He forces an answer, and then from then on, it's like, well, I can't reason with this fucker, so I'm going to be an asshole to him, which, I mean, I get that. But anyways, go on.
No, I'm just reminiscing on every scene just makes me smile. I lose my train of thought because I'm just so, it's like a flashback. I get lost in the mood of remembering the scene, and I just lovingly remember it. So, and that's that's really powerful, that a movie can do that. Anyway, what they represent, Eli and Daniel. This is something I want to bring up. I don't know if I wrote this later. By seeing Eli as his opponent, it kind of, I don't think he ever had an issue with God or the church ever, really, in the beginning. But he has a huge issue with Eli. But what that becomes for him is a struggle against God and the church.
Yeah. Oh,
and
certainly. He starts off with, I enjoy all faiths, I don't belong to one. And Paul just accepts that and moves the fuck on. Here's my business proposal. And Eli won't accept that, so it becomes a personal challenge.
Yeah. And then he has to rise to that challenge. And like, well, fuck your God kind of thing, It's funny how these little slights maketh the man that will later be Daniel Plainview in his later life. And, oh, man. Yeah, I had that written down. Religion sets him. He's already Daniel Plainview, but it kind of casts him in a mold where he then actualizes that role, or that whatever the church had pushed him to renounce, both in terms of like his family and God. What else does he have at that point but the money around him, And I think that is so interesting. It's like religion is actually what ultimately doomed him in a weird symbolic sense. Because Eli's fire and brimstone charlatanism is really what I think sets in motion the utter destruction of the Daniel Plainview we knew in the first half of the movie. And also his brother, but that's just rich people shit,
Yeah.
My next point was, this is kind of the same thing. When he has to confront the ugly perception of himself, he kind of becomes okay with becoming that, or walking down that path more consciously at that point. So I'd written that down. I already talked about at length the circumstances and the scope change.
Yep.
Daniel's relationship to women I thought was really interesting. Because you never see, like I said, he doesn't want to marry, he doesn't have a girlfriend. You don't ever really see him at the brothel unless it's with his, like, that one time with his brother when he's just miserable, paying for his brother to get fucked. And just watching his brother beg him for money.
Yeah.
As you hear the giggling, almost like mocking laughter in the background, as you just see Daniel Plainview. Anyway, in his relationship with his son, who he loves, he says Mary's a nice little girl. They should be friends, Yeah. Because there's that parent in him still that's like, this is good for him. It ultimately was. They got married. It was Mary who learned, sign language with him. Yeah. And that was a good thing. And it's a little parenting thing that he did. It's like, well, you should have a nice little girlfriend your age, which is very kind. And he's doing stuff to protect her, like, because his son's like, oh, I love this part too, which is more about the God thing too. If Mary doesn't pray, her dad beats her. It's like, Mary's the little one, right? Yeah. It's like, okay. So it's good for the son that she has a little girl playmate. It's good that he stops the little girl getting beaten. And at the same time is also kind of like creating this idea like, this religion thing,
Yeah.
Shouldn't beat kids. Don't abide by that. At the same time, it also completely emasculates and invalidates Abel as a man or the head of his household. But that was already
Yeah.
kind of seen when Eli takes over. Was Abel the one who died in the story of Cain and Abel?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so he gets like completely owned. Interesting.
At any rate, everyone in their family is named after a biblical character.
Right. And then this is my last point, the one that I really wanted to kind of talk about briefly is I wrote down isolation proves his distrust of people. Because he says,
Ooh,
I see
like
the worst
that.
in people.
I think I see where
don't-
you're going there.
Yeah, I don't need to see past them to get everything I need.
Yeah.
That is by far the most powerful line in this movie, is in that minor dialogue he has with his brother. And it's not like, I have a competition in me, where he sees the ugliness in people because he knows how much potential there is in people to hurt people, or even, if we're going like Watchmen, that potential, like the potential of the atom to be used for good or evil, is also inherent in the man, or in an idea.
Yeah.
And he sees, himself exemplifies the potential of a human, of a man, of someone like him, where he's able to achieve so much. But he also sees that can be used for bad, perhaps. And
Yeah.
the manipulation that people have in them, like Eli, just to achieve their own ends. And even he uses manipulation, like, we're going to have more wheat here. It'll be coming out of your ears. But every
Yeah.
time they cut back to the long shots of the derrick as time is passing by, it is always the same barren desert plot. Perhaps there's more imports, but the land is not fertile. It was never the idea to have it fertile. And I like this one, the Nerdist brought it up, I think. It was like, we'll have schools. They'll bring their families. Bitch, miners and like riggers don't have families.
Yeah.
The oil rig dudes and miners just have, they're one dude, and they suffer immensely because they're just trying to scrape by and make enough money so they can perhaps have a family later, or just get by with what they can. You know, a lot of these miners get super duper drunk and just become really in debt to like the company store.
Yeah.
That's the life of these people, really. And so the very notion of like, oh, they're going to bring their families, it's going to be great, we're going to have schools and more wheat than you can shake a fist at or whatever, is like,
Yep.
it's beautifully hollow. You know, it's just like, oh man, yeah, this was, that was his own sermon. Eli promises hellfire, and then Daniel promises prosperity. Which is beautiful. I love that.
Yeah.
But yeah, the isolation that Daniel starts to have to deal with at first in the beginning, when he's starting his business, when he's torn away from his son. I always forget his name. But when he's torn away from his son, he's then again isolated. HW is my boy. HW. He's torn away from his brother, and then by proxy the rest of his family, and then torn away from, I guess, like in the church, just everybody, everything. And ultimately, this isolation gives him he always had the perspective. I'm sure I'm perhaps projecting a little bit, but it also proves a lot of what he knew was true in then removing himself from those people or that society, those interactions. And he's, you know, the ugliness of family, of the business, of the church, of these people. And it's like, oh man, dude. It's so brutal. And then, of course, that you know, in the last scene when you see Daniel, just very much a broken, kind of crazy almost. Because he has a wildness in him now. I love the wildness in Daniel in the last scenes. His eyes, he looks like an animal.
Yeah.
But he's supposed to be the epitome of human ambition or potential, even, as he lives in his mansion during the Depression, shooting like plates off of his furniture because he's just so bored.
Yeah.
How he then finally removes himself from everything. The last thing that maybe would have given him joy, which is his son. And I love their little interaction. It's like, I know we've had our issues in the past. We don't see eye to eye, but it's time for me to go out on my own. And when Daniel says like, you're making such a misstep. Now you're my competition. Because he has to crush his competition.
Yeah. That instinct didn't go away.
Yeah. You don't know exactly. I'm sure there's a lot, you know, like where HW and him disagreed, didn't see eye to eye. You can kind of imagine like rich people problems and like just the business that he's involved in and all that other stuff. because you know they're estranged. You can tell they're estranged. And when he finally has to treat HW as his competition, he's like, you couldn't have just waited, because it would have been his anyway.
Yeah.
Ah, man. There is such a brutal truth in a business sense in this, honestly, where it's like, it's a really sad reality, where it's like, there was a time years ago I had a very good handle on this, of like, now you're my competition. Truly the final straw. And when he kills Eli at the very end, it's just like, what else, man? I have nothing else anyway. And so when his final line is, I'm finished. Like, he's ruined or he's complete, you know?
Yeah.
That
Either
dual
way.
meaning of that line. And I love that speech so much. The first time I saw this movie, it was like always the scene I loved. I drink your milkshake. I drink it up. And every time I come back to it later in subsequent viewings, that's not what comes back to me. That's not its most memorable feature. It's the life of Daniel, everything else in his life that is more memorable than just the speech of I drink your milkshake. Because that is not what it's about, necessarily. It's about sticking it to him. It's not about the business or the technical aspect. It's the, I finally have you right where I've always wanted you. You know? That beautiful revenge, that Montesquieu revenge. Is it Montesquieu I'm thinking of? Or Moriarty? No, yeah, Montesquieu.
I was thinking the, what's it fucking called?
Am I thinking Montesquieu?
No.
No.
The Count of Monte
Monte
Cristo.
Cristo! Thank you. You got it. Monte Cristo, not Montesquieu.
Yeah.
Where that deep-seated revenge that takes so many years to finally blossom, but completely destroys those that did him wrong. I love that. Ugh. What a very satisfying ending. You're bewildered, you're smiling, and you're just so happy with the full experience. Ugh. That's all the things I liked about There Will Be Blood. I went on for a very long time.
I think this is, I mean, I've said this almost since the day I saw it, but I think in my mind, though I'm sure you could pick out things, this is the closest thing to a perfect movie, in my personal opinion, that I have ever gotten to.
I wonder if this will be like, maybe it's just because it's my opinion, but I get like a lot of Citizen Kane vibes from this movie.
Sure.
And I wonder if in future years or in later years, they'll be going back to There Will Be Blood in a similar way as like a watershed, or at least just a perfect movie. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really a really fucking special movie, dude.
Yeah.
I think, there's a lot to glean from it. And I think
yeah.
everyone's going to get something different. And we just touched on two potential, perspectives on this movie.
Yeah.
It's just a really fucking well done piece of art. And I think time will tell pretty definitively that Paul Thomas Anderson is one of the great directors of his generation. I think, I don't know of a lot of directors who have had a career as long as his with movies that are as consistently high quality as his. And he deserves a spot up there. That's for sure.
I agree.
I remember this movie and No Country for Old Men were both battling it out at the Academy Awards the year that they came out, because they both came out the same year. And let's just see how they did Academy Award. Daniel Day-Lewis got Best Actor. Robert Elswit, the cinematographer, got Best Cinematography. It was nominated for Best Picture, nominated for Best Director, Best Screenplay, Best Art Direction, Best Editing, Best Sound Editing. I mean, obviously, it was rightfully appreciated by all the right people. Because between those award nominations and the box office take, I think it was appreciated well. I just, like you mentioned at the very beginning, I think it's tough to pitch this to someone who wouldn't willingly sit through an art house movie as well.
And that's really unfortunate, because I I'm the biggest missionary for this movie. I'm like, this is my favorite movie.
I mention it
I
all
want
the
everyone to
fucking
watch
time.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
but no one ever does.
Yeah.
It's like, too bad, because this is, let's be narcissistic. If it's our favorite movie, it is the best movie, you know? And it's like, well, you're depriving yourselves, basically, is what I'm trying to say. Because, like, if this movie is so powerful to us, we see so much in this movie, and I wish that other people would at least give it a chance, goddamn.
Yeah. I just think it's really fucking special, man.
Yeah.
Well, it's been about, what has it been? About an hour 25, so we're almost exactly at the hour and a half mark.
Yeah. Do we want to
Any
run
closing...
down?
What's that?
Do we want to run down anything that didn't work for us? If you have any.
I mean, go for it. I racked my brain. I watched it twice in the last 2 days, and I racked my brain, and I don't think I could come up with anything. So go for it if you have anything.
My biggest issue is Eli. Well, my biggest issue is in the beginning when Paul comes and visits Daniel. It's the same actor. I don't like that. I was so confused the first time I saw it. I didn't know what was going on. I was like, what?
Yeah,
Is he just putting on
that's
an
a thing
act?
that I think needs to leave forever. If you're not playing twins, we don't need the same actor playing two roles.
Yeah, and like
That was
he didn't even
actually-
like try to change his demeanor. Like it was literally just him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to say something real quick. My friend Zach Pugh, who's a comic from Los Angeles, he was visiting me a few months ago in November.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about the movie Suburbicon. And he was very unfair to that movie, which I think was an okay movie. Not bad. Not great, but not bad. He was very unfair to it. But the one point he made that started me thinking about this was there are two characters who are not necessarily described as twins explicitly, who are sisters, who are played by the same actor, and it gets very confusing which, like, what the purpose of that was, one, and which is which during certain scenes where they're in the same scene.
Mm-hmm.
This movie has that same effect in the first entrance of Eli,
Mm-hmm.
but I think I'm more forgiving with it
Mm-hmm.
because of the fact that Daniel Day-Lewis's character almost acts as a vessel for the audience.
Yeah.
Like, if you look at his face when Eli shows up, he's like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And
he's
then he
like,
literally
"What?"
looks at his son, and they have this moment of silent confusion,
Yeah.
and then he looks back.
Some telepathy going on.
Yeah, he's like, what? What the
Yeah.
fuck?
Yeah, I did enjoy it for that. Watching his reaction, I'm like, what the fuck? That's the one thing I'll give it. Because like, if it's supposed to be like symbolic and if just for the reaction later, I like it. But
Yeah.
generally, I dislike that. I did say Eli, his actor, his performance kind of is a little weak for me. But what this really does is that just serves to make Daniel Day-Lewis look so much better next to him. Just magnifying his performance. So...
I really enjoy the fuck out of
Eli.
Paul Dano's performance because to me, he embodies everything that I hate about evangelical Christianity. And he does it
Wow.
using the smug looks on his face and the woe is me. Why didn't I get included when, he gets snubbed a couple times. To me, he's like a petulant, spoiled child. And his acting in that regard is spot on to me. So
Yeah,
I didn't have
yeah.
that problem with him.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying. For some reason, I just think he's a little bit weak, and maybe that's because... No, I would say that regardless. I want that character to be that, but I don't know if I want him to be in that role, if that makes sense.
Sure.
I like him for exactly what he did, but at the same time, I think he came off as like a bit of a weak actor. Or at least a weaker character than what possibly could have been. I don't know. Either way, it just feels very grounded.
Sure.
Pretty realistic, honestly.
Yeah.
That's all. Anything didn't work for you?
I mean, now that you mention it, I agree with the shouldn't have one actor play characters that didn't need to be twins.
Mm-hmm.
That will be a decision that forever confuses me with regard to this movie. Because you could have easily just had someone that looks very similar to Paul Dano play his non-twin brother.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I don't know. I don't think I have any problems with this movie except the lack of people who seem to still talk about it. I feel like I never want to stop talking about this movie. It's so rich and so dense, so full of shit. Not like full of shit, but full of stuff.
Full of oil.
We
Full of
should
blood.
all be shouting about it at all time.
Yeah. So I'm glad we finally made this podcast to, I don't know. We could point our finger in this general direction should someone want to know why it is that we like it, but also, getting people to watch it in general. And this, I guess we completely spoiled the plot, which I think is for the best though. Like we needed to talk about this fully to really go in depth as to why we liked it. Like The Watchmen. We spoiled the end of The Watchmen. Ozymandias. Surprise.
Yeah.
Whatever.
I honestly, I mean, I'm just happy we're able to put out into a very content-saturated world another piece of content that argues for this movie's merits. If I can be completely honest and dismissive of any potential listeners we might have. At any rate, we've been talking for over an hour and a half. I have to go catch up with one of our mutual friends very soon here.
RT.
Hey, Anson, I got a question for you. Would you recommend this movie?
I would, Paul. And I have a question for you, Paul. Would you recommend There Will Be Blood?
I would. All right. Until next time.
I have been an oil man.
And I have been a fetus in a glass jar on the mantelpiece.
You're the afterbirth. All right, Paul. Well, enjoy your $10,000 cash in hand, 3 oil derricks, producing nicely. And I'll see you next time.
Next time.
Next time.
I'm finished.